Cool. All right. Okay, so welcome to the first homework review of this illustrious fall 2021 cohort. I can't remember years. I don't know what year it is. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do today first is I kind of want to go over just some like quick little like hacky shortcuts that I like to use while I'm coding. A lot of these are going to be probably super obvious. Some of them maybe not as much, but I think that they're all very helpful. So let's go ahead and go over some of that stuff. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Share that. And let's get rid of these meeting controls. Okay, cool. And feel free, like during this homework review, to ask questions or stop me at any time if there's something that doesn't make sense or there's anything that you would like me to maybe like dive more into and like kind of go over more in depth. I definitely want to do that. These homework reviews are really like for you guys. So cool. All right. So just a couple little tips. Okay, the first one is I don't know who all here is like used to using a Mac or not, but if you haven't set this up already, this is extremely helpful. If you go to System Preferences in your mouse, let me actually, I don't think I'm sharing my whole screen, but I'll just kind of like describe it. But basically, you can set a right click on a MacBook, and you can set it to where on your trackpad, it's either a right click on like the little like magic trackpad on the right corner, or you can set it to actually be a right click on your mouse. That way you don't have to, I think it's like option click or command click is like the default Mac right click. But you can set that up, and that is extremely helpful if any of you haven't done that already. The other shortcuts that I like to use a lot are, and these are like huge time savers. I definitely recommend that all of you do this. But the first one is to automatically save whatever file you're on, is to do Command S on your keyboard. Command S is going to automatically save, it'll save that file that you're on. Super, super helpful. Also, getting used to using keyboard shortcuts for copying, pasting, and cutting are crucial just to kind of help your speed and help your productivity. So the way to copy is to do Command C. And it's now just kind of like second nature for me, like my pinky and like my like ring finger is kind of automatically like always just jump to that. And you'll get to that point for sure. But to do that, you just highlight whatever you want to do, take Command C, and then that automatically copies it to your computer's clipboard. Then you can paste it using Command V. Command V is going to be to paste that. So V as in van down by the river. There's that. Then there's also Command X. Command X is like copy, but it also deletes whatever, it cuts whatever you are highlighting. So that can be helpful if you're wanting to move something and not just duplicate something. So I can Command X that, jump down here, and then when I hit Command V, it'll paste it down there. So it gets rid of it, also copies it to your clipboard so you can still paste it somewhere else. The other really crucial one is Command Z, as in zebra. That's the undo button. I do that all of the time. So if I just type a bunch of gibberish, I can then hold down the command button, just hit Z, and it's just going to kind of go backwards in time as I'm doing that. So that is also super helpful. So Command C for copy, Command V for pasting, Command X for cutting, Command Z for undoing, and Command S for saving. Some other helpful tricks are using the Alt key in VS Code. So in VS Code, if you highlight a section, you hold down the Alt or Option key and then hit up or down on your arrow key, it is going to move that entire code block up or down. So you can just kind of like move it up and move it down. It's helpful because let's say I have a function here and I have all of this code up here. Like I wouldn't really want to do this in real life, but let's say I wrote this function, I'm like, oh, dang it. I actually want all of this code in here. So I could, go up here, Command X, oops. Hold on, there we go. I could highlight this, cut it, come in here, tab, paste it, do that. Or I could highlight this, I could hold Alt, and it's gonna bump it down into that function. So that's helpful. So having a selection.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it's very, very nice. The other cool thing that you can do with Alt is, hi, I'm a copy. Okay, so I have that. If you hold Shift, Alt, or Shift Option and press up or down, it's going to copy whatever line you're on down or up, depending on however you want to do it. So that can also be helpful. So for example, if you need to write a bunch of functions, you can be like def function, whatever, and you could take that, do that, and then you could just go through and rename them however you want. And that way you can just kind of like quickly copy chunks of code without having to like command copy, move your cursor around where you want it to go. So that's really helpful. Yeah, any questions about that? Cool, those are kind of my favorite ones. There's a whole bunch of VS Code shortcuts. I have these two guys that are really old now. They are just sticky notes, but they have like a whole bunch of shortcuts on them. I leave them kind of like right there on my computer because I can never remember everything. But I will share them. I'll share more with you as time goes on. But those are some of the most common ones that I use that you will probably find some use for, especially early on in the cohort. So cool. The other thing that I wanted to kind of go over is just a quick review in the terminal. If you came into this like boot camp without a whole lot of like computer background, which is kind of where I was, like I knew like basic HTML and CSS, but like beyond that, I didn't have a whole lot. So getting used to using the terminal took a lot of practice for me. It always felt really scary and intimidating to use the console of the terminal. But I just wanted to do a quick little review. So one of the most important things with the terminal is going to be knowing this tilde character and being able to CD into that. Whenever you CD into your tilde or tilde character, you are going to be in your like root user directory. So if you do print working directory, that's going to have you be right here. So my user is like Taylor Collins, that's my name. Inside of that Taylor Collins folder, that's going to be like all of your main computer folders, like your desktop folder, downloads folder, documents folder, some other stuff. So if QLS, yeah, you can see everything right there. So you got like desktop, documents, downloads, Dropbox, movies, music, blah, 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 all that stuff. So if you ever get lost, you can always do CD tilde. It's going to take you right into your root directory. CD is the command that you use to move around, kind of navigate through your folders. Stands for change directory. Getting used to using CD is very important. You'll hear people all the time say CD into that or CD out of that. What they're saying is move into that folder in your console, or CD into that folder in your console, or CD out. So if I am in my like user root directory, I can now run ls, and that stands for list, and it lists all of the files and folders inside of the folder that I'm currently in. So if you're ever wondering what's in there, you can do ls, and there's my desktop. Let's go ahead and go into my desktop. And now we're inside of my desktop folder. I can ls there, cool. I have this folder called current. That's where a lot of my work is right now. So I'm going to cd current. Now I'm in current. I can ls there. I can see all of this stuff, these folders that I have here. I want to go into my, I think it's my test practice. And there we go. So now I'm in the folder that I want to be in. If you want to go back, you do cd space and then 2 periods. And that's going to bounce you back a folder. So you can kind of go back and forth by going into a folder and then cd space ... That's going to take you out. The other cool thing is that your terminal will do autocomplete for you, which is really helpful. So if we do ls in my test practice, you can have this like grocery list.rb file, grocery list1.rb, JS test.js file, and then a Ruby test.rb file. If I start typing things in, I can hit tab, but maybe not. Actually, that's a bad idea because I have 2 things that are like basically named like the same thing. Let me cd out. So we'll go there. Okay, I'm going to cd into, okay, so this hackathon grader. Okay, so I started typing hack. I don't have anything else in this file that has HACK as the letters that are beginning the name of that file. So if I hit hack and then hit tab, it's going to auto complete it for me because there's only one file that this can be. So that can be helpful when you're like trying to type things out. You don't have to type out the whole thing. You can just type out the unique portion of it, and then it'll take you right into that. So there's that. The other thing is, well, yeah, so you can also do touch. So touch is going to allow you to create a file. So if I do touch and then do test.rb, what that does is it creates a file in the file that you're currently in, or in the folder that you're currently in. So I just did touch test.rb. I am inside of my current folder. Now, if I list out the files there, I should have a test.rb. And there it is right there. So I just touched that, and that created this test.rb file. You can also make a directory. So that's going to be your mkdir command. And I'm just going to call this test folder. And that's going to create a folder as opposed to a file. So we'll do that. And then let's do an ls. And there it is. I have this brand new test folder there. So if I cd into my test folder and ls, you can see that it's blank. There's nothing there because I just created it. There's nothing inside of it. Yeah, the other, okay, so there's 2 more things early on that are really helpful with the terminal. One of them is the Command K shortcut. I like that because what it does is it actually clears your terminal. It just kind of wipes it clean, lets you start with a clean slate. Sometimes your terminal can start to look really messy and jumbly, especially if you're doing a lot of stuff in it. So I like to run a Command K every once in a while and just kind of clear it, especially if I'm doing some like testing or like trying to find bugs. I don't like to see a lot of old stuff at the top. I like to see the most recent, the most fresh changes. So I'll do that. The last thing is IRB. So IRB stands for the interactive Ruby shell. Whenever you type IRB, it basically opens up this Ruby program in your terminal that lets you write raw Ruby and execute it right in your terminal. This is a really, really good way to kind of mess around and practice and kind of experiment with various things with Ruby. And I use it all of the time. And I definitely recommend that all of you use it as well. So when I'm in Ruby, I can basically just write Ruby right here. So for example, I can create a variable I can set it equal to 1. And then I hit enter, and it's going to return whatever I just typed. So it returns the 1 there. That's fine. And create another one, y, and call it 2. Cool. Then I can do x plus y, hit enter, and it's going to do that calculation for me. So in here, you can just kind of like mess with stuff, which is really cool. So for example, like you can like, if you're like, okay, like I want to do this in my program, but I don't want to have to like write it all out in my actual program and like make a new function for it because it's getting complicated. You can come into IRB and just practice stuff. So for example, if you're like, okay, I have a string and it's hello world, okay? And let's say like I am wanting to write a function that basically takes each character of that string and makes it one item for an array. Okay, you did some Googling. You're like, okay, I found a method that I think will work. It's the splice method. Actually, we'll do split, the split method. And let's say you'd run that. You're like, okay, let's just try it out. Boom. Okay, cool, that did it. So now you're like, okay, I know that that works, cool. Now I can go add that into my actual real life program. So the IRB shell is really, really helpful. It's a really good way to just kind of like practice things, try things out, experiment with different things. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's not, I mean, it's not good for writing whole big long programs, but to just try out various methods that you haven't used before, etc. It's really, really helpful for. So that's IRB. Any questions about that?
I suppose the only question is, how do you quit out of it or clear it?
Yeah, so to get out of IRB, you're going to type exit, and that'll take you out. I think you can also hit Control C. Nope, maybe quit. Yeah, so quit and exit will pull you out.
Cool.
Cool. All right, so that is IRB. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get into now. Am I in the right? No. Let me just get into my right folder. What was it? Test practice, I think. Cool. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with the actual review today. So what I want to do is I wanted to go over first kind of how to use what's called bracket notation and using that to kind of get inside of and drill down through arrays and hashes. It's definitely kind of a weird concept, especially if you're new to programming. Arrays and hashes are just, yeah, they're just kind of a weird thing that you'll definitely get used to because they are used absolutely everywhere. And so you want to become very, very comfortable with these. And you want to become very, very comfortable with all of the common functions and methods that are used on hashes and arrays. But yeah, today I just kind of want to talk about bracket notation, how we can kind of access different levels and layers of nested arrays and hashes. So basically, before we kind of get into this is just like a sample like array, like a random like piece of generic data that I just sort of made up. We'll get that and get into that in just a second. But I wanted to just talk about arrays and hashes for a second first. So quick review, I think everyone knows this, but arrays are going to be in brackets. Hashes are going to be in curly braces. So there's one difference right off the bat. They're very similar things, but hashes are in square brackets. Arrays are in square brackets. Hashes are in curly braces. Arrays are lists of individual things, individual items. So for example, it could be a list of numbers. So this is an array. You can tell it's an array because it has these square brackets. That's one single array. It's one item. The array is just one item, but it has, what is it? I don't know, like 12-ish numbers in like listed out inside of it. Okay. You can have an array that has just one item inside of it. You can have arrays that have literally millions of items inside of it. For example, if you think about like Facebook, in their backend database, they have arrays and hashes that contain every single user on their site. That's in what's called JSON data, which we'll talk about later, but it's basically a giant array with how many people are on Facebook? Is it like 30? That's like a billion people or something. It's like a billion item array. It's huge. And within that is like nested hashes and arrays with various pieces of data. So arrays can be really, really small. They can also be really, really big. The important thing to know though is that each item inside of it is just one item. So you got one number. You can also have strings inside of here. So you have the letter A, you have I am cool, and hello. So in this array, we have three items. We have the letter A, the string I am cool, and the string hello. They're just delineated, they're separated by this comma. You can also have arrays that have arrays inside of them. So in this case, this is an array with that it consists of three empty arrays. So in these arrays, you can also list items. So now this arrays here is equal to one array, the single array, that has within it three individual arrays. This first array has 1, 2, 3, 4 in it. This array has 1, 23, 3, and 4, and this array just has 1. We can even put an array inside of an array inside of an array. And we can basically do that forever, infinitely. You can just have arrays inside of arrays, inside of arrays, inside of arrays, inside of arrays. This is completely valid code, having this. Hashes are very similar to arrays, but instead of containing individual items, each item is actually divided up into two parts. It has a key and a value. Both of those are things that we get to decide what they're called if we're the programmer and we're the one creating the hash. So let's say I wanted to create a hash of like my favorite places. I could say, okay, we'll have a location, and let's say it's Japan. Cool. And then let's say we wanted to give it the population, and say the population is like, I think it's like 100 million people. 100 million people. And then we could say like cuisine. And maybe we'll make this like sushi, for example. Okay.
Do you always have to put it in quotes, even if it's a number? Like the population? No. Okay.
Yeah, so no, you do not. There's pros and cons to both, and we can kind of get into those later, but for now, you don't really have to worry about that.
Okay.
Just know that if it's in quotes, it's a string, and if it's not in quotes, it's a number. And the difference between it is like, if it's a number, you can like do arithmetic on it. You can like add to it, multiply it, divide it, etc. If it's a string, you can't. It's basically just like words in a book. It's just like printed characters that don't really mean anything.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, so that's a hash. So remember, in an array, like each item is separated by a comma. In a hash, each item is still separated by a comma, but that item is divided into two parts, a key and the value. The value is the important like part. It's like the B part of it. The key is really just kind of like a descriptor. It's a way for you to describe what the value is. So arrays also have two parts, but it's a little more subtle. So I'm going to do like a C, C, C. Okay. Arrays can be numbered from left to right. And that number is kind of like the order that it's in the array. So it's kind of like a number that tells you where that item falls in the array. So, and it goes from smallest to biggest, left to right. The important thing to remember, and this is like critical, like super critical, you don't have to memorize a lot in programming because you can like just Google a lot of things and whatever, but memorizing this is critical. It starts with the number 0. It does not start with the number 1. So,
and that's just to make sure I'm thinking of this right. That is called its index, right?
Exactly. That is called the index. So the index number for the first item in an array is 0, not 1, it's 0. The index for the second number in an array is 1, which means that C in this array would be 2. It'd be at index number 2. D would be index number 3. So a lot of times you'll hear programmers, you'll hear people say like, okay, we want to get the item at index 2. What they're referring to is the thing in the array that is sitting at the index number 2. So in this case, that would be the letter C, because A is 0, B is 1, C is 2. So that's kind of how you can like designate where you are inside of an array, is by the index number. Hashes, on the other hand, do not have that index number. All hashes have are keys. So you, for example, you can't say that this location in Japan is at index 0. It's not. Hashes do not recognize that. It's just not set up that way. The only way that you can reference this is by saying, okay, we want the item in the hash at key location, or we want the value or the item in the hash at key population. So those are kind of the main differences between hashes and arrays. Where it starts to get confusing is you can have arrays and hashes nested within each other. So for example, this is very, very common, but let's say I had a variable called favorite places. And so I wanted to have a whole bunch of places that were kind of set up like this, right? So I have like location, Japan, population, 100 million, cuisine, sushi. Well, let's say I wanted to have another favorite place, like, I don't know, Spain or something. So what I can't do is like do a comma and then location again, and then Spain, because we already have a location here. So you can't duplicate keys, okay? So one way that people and programmers get around that is by creating arrays of hashes. So they'll have an array. Let me tack on that last curly brace. They'll have an array, and then the first item in that array will be that. Then they'll do a comma, they'll add another array. So I'm just going to paste like that. And then instead of Japan, though, they'll say Spain. And instead of 100 million, they'll say, I don't know how many people say, 30 million. Instead of cuisine, they'll say, I don't know, tapas or something. So in this case, favorite places is an array with 2 hashes as its items, okay? So because favorite places is an array, we can access each of these hashes by an index. Hash 1, I'm going to call it the Japan hash, which contains location Japan, population that, cuisine sushi. That is going to be at index 0 because it's the first item in that array. Our Spain hash, that's going to be at index 1 because it's the second item in that hash. So one way that I like to kind of like this can start to get very confusing. So this is going to be like Japan over and over again, but just pretend it's like a different country. I can do this. Oops, there's something bad. I can do that. And I can, now I have this array of a bunch of favorite places. And let's pretend that they're not all Japan. Let's pretend the other ones are like Brazil, Antarctica, wherever. But this is kind of hard to read, right? Like I'm looking at this and I'm like if I just put my cursor there, off the top of my head, I'm like, I don't know what index it is. And I have to like, okay, well, like there's like, here's index 0, and then there's 1, and then there's 2, and like, it's just kind of hard to see. So a lot of times when I'm writing out a data set like this, I like to kind of format it. So I'll like put my top level, parent level array out like that. And then I will kind of line item each of my hashes like this. So you can just do this on each of them. I'm not going to do it for all of them because there's like a million. So I'm just going to delete the other ones. But I'll line item them out like this. This right here is the exact same as that. It's just formatted differently. And it's a lot easier, to read, in my opinion. Let's go back to that. There we go. So this is a little bit easier to read, but remember, it's the exact same as it was before. I've just put them all on a new line. See, they're still delineated, they're still separated by a comma. But now it's a lot easier to see that this is an array of 1 hash, 2 hashes, 3 hashes, all the way down to the last hash. Okay, so there's that. As far as that goes, are there any questions so far?
So in the homework, I made the 2 users into one array to make it easier. Would I want to take off the variable name for those then? You wouldn't want to like name each hash a variable within the array?
Name it a variable. So I think I know what you're talking about. Did you do something like this? Like users equals like a hash, and you have like user 1 equals another hash, and then user 2 equals like the user 2 hash, like that? Like that would be like,
yeah, because it was like already was like that, but then I just added the array around it.
I did that.
Yeah, that is like, that's completely valid. That's totally valid. And like, so for example, like, let me do something up here. Okay. So we have location, Japan, population, 100 million, cuisine. Okay. Most places have more than one cuisine type, right? So let's actually, instead of making that just a string, let's actually make the cuisine key, let's make that equal to an array. And now we can list out several cuisines. So we can say sushi, we could say sashimi, we could say ramen, okay? That is exactly the same, Sydney, is kind of what I think a lot of you probably did when you had like a user 1, and then you set that equal to a hash. So you have a user's hash, okay? The first item in that user's hash has a key of user 1, and that value is another hash, okay? It's very similar to this, where you have a favorite places array, okay? The first item in that array is this Japan hash, okay? The first item in that Japan hash is location key, equals Japan, population key, 100 million. But then the cuisine key, instead of just equaling a string, it equals an array. And we could put anything in that array, okay? So this array is a list of 3 strings. It's the same thing as this user 1 key, instead of equaling an array, you actually have it equal to another hash. Yeah, that's totally valid. As we get more into like Ruby on Rails and creating like the back end of a website and working with data sets, you will come to probably find out and realize that setting up data like this, isn't probably the best idea. And but by this, I'm talking about like this users thing where you have like a user one key set to something. It's also just not really like tenable. Like it's not even really possible. Well, I don't want to say it's impossible. It's not very likely to come up in Ruby on Rails. So I don't want to get too much into that because we're going to kind of naturally get into just how databases should be set up. And that'll all kind of make sense in the future. But I want you to know that even though this might not be like a big picture best practice, it's totally valid code and it works. And like, that's completely fine. So I think that the fact that you did that is great. And it shows that you're like thinking about the data and like how arrays and hashes work. So I think that's totally fine. Cool. Okay. So there's that. So I'm going to delete this. That's going to throw an error for me, but okay. Let's go ahead and go into here. So we have our users here. Okay. So I made up this data set, this users data set. I'm just going to make it an instance variable just in case I need access to it in other stuff. So this users variable is equal to an array. And you can tell it looks kind of funky. And I did that because I wanted to format it differently, even though each of these is actually set up exactly the same. I just wanted to kind of get you used to seeing things that are formatted a little bit differently. So in this array, our first item is for a user that I just chose to give an ID of 1. I just made up a key, called it ID, gave it the number 1, have a key, gave it Taylor, then I have some hobbies, and then I gave an array of hobbies. Okay, so pretty simple, you know, like not too crazy. Then put a comma. Okay, that means that my next hash array, the next item, or in other words, index 1 now of this user array is this. I named them Janice for some reason. But what I did is I kind of formatted this array a little bit differently. Okay, I put my array out here. I kind of like brought the closing array down, and then I put each item in that array on a different line. Okay, this is the exact same. It will run. It is like set up. You can do the exact same things to it as this one. It's just formatted differently. Okay. Same with this one. So this again gave an ID of 3, a name of George, hobbies. Again, I just put them all on the same line, but I kind of bumped it down a line. So you'll see data formatted in different ways all over the place. It's important to always just kind of look for the opening and closing, either a square bracket denoting an array or curly braces denoting a hash. So on this one, you can see, okay, there's that opening square bracket there. There's the closing square bracket. Okay, we know that we've got an array here. For this one, we got square bracket there, square bracket there. Okay, everything in there, each of those is going to be a line item, one index for that array. Same with this one. We got that square bracket here, that square bracket here. Right after it is the closing curly brace for this hash. But then on a separate line in between that, we have each of those items. So that's kind of how that's laid up. Okay, so I want to now kind of talk about how to drill in to each of these. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do puts at user. Okay, users. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's come to here, and I'm just going to run this code as is. So let's do Ruby tests. Cool. So what I did is I put users. So I just users equals this entire array. So it's going to print out that whole array into my console right there. And you can see Ruby automatically formats things its own way. So even though I have it written out all funky up here, Ruby doesn't care because it knows that this is exactly the same as that. Like the values are different, but the way it's set up is the exact same. So that's why these look very, very similar. Okay, so let's say I wanted to come into my users array, and I just wanted to print out the name of, actually, let's not even do that. Let's say so I printed out all 3 of my users, Taylor, Janice, and George. That's cool, but let's say I just want to print out Taylor. Like, I don't want to worry about anyone else, okay? What I could do is I could use bracket notation. Bracket notation, again, is what allows you to get into specific parts of an array or a hash. And remember, at the top, if you're in an array, you're going to put the index number inside of the brackets. If you're in a hash, you're going to put the key. Just those 2 simple rules. So we're looking at this. We got our users. That's an array. Okay. We just want this line item. Okay. We don't want Janice. We don't want George. We just want Taylor. This hash is at index 0 for the users array, right? Because this is index 0. This is index 1. And this is index 2 for the users array. So I can put 0 right there. And if I run that, that's going to only print out the Taylor hash. Okay. If I put in 1, that is going to print out the Janice hash. And then same thing. If I put in 2, that's going to print out the George hash. If I put in 3, it's not going to print out anything because I don't have an index 3 in this array. So it's just blank because it doesn't have anything to print out. It looks for it, but it's like all you have is 0, 1, 2, no 3. So that's not going to work. Alan, do you have a question?
Yeah, what happens? Are you able to say, for example, print out Taylor, but you don't know his index? All you know is his name. Say, is there a way to do that?
There is. So that's getting more into using loops and like going through an array. So what you could do is you could do a .each loop on users, and so you could say users.each do, and then set it to say like user or something, and then you could say, okay, if user square bracket name equals Taylor, then return this. Doing that, you wouldn't know the index. You would just use that each loop to find the right item that kind of meets the criteria that you give it. But we're not going to go into the loops just yet. I know you've talked about it this week, but I'm going to kind of stay focused on the bracket notation. Maybe that's something we can go into more next week, but yes. And that's extremely common, is to loop through an entire array, give it something like look for this value in the name key. And if you find a match, return that. That's super common, but yeah, we'll talk about that later. So, okay, cool. So we passed in the number for the index of this first one. We did it for all the other ones too. Let's say we wanted to go in and print out just Taylor, the name. So before, when we printed out users at index 0, it gave us like, yeah, this whole thing, like my ID, my name, and all of my hobbies. Okay, what if we just wanted the name? Okay, so what we could do is we're going to have to start at the outermost layer and slowly work our way in. So the first layer we have to get into is this array. Okay, so we're in our array and we know we want to get right here. Well, this is in what index of this outside array? It's in index 0. Okay, so we're at index 0. This is index 0. Cool. Okay, now we're at a hash. Okay, we were at an array, but now we're in a hash because we got the curly braces and we've got the key value pairs. Now, instead of passing in an index number, remember, for hashes, we're going to find the key that we want. So we're in this hash, we want the name key because we want to print out Taylor. So if we pass in the name key, that's going to get us the value for that key. So now if we run this, we're just going to get the name Taylor. So we started out with users, which is equal to an array, okay? We wanted to get to this first line item because that's the Taylor one. We didn't want to go to index 1 or index 2. We wanted to go to index 0. So we went into index 0. Once we're in there, we wanted to get to name. So we go to name. Cool. Okay. So what if we swap that out for hobbies? Okay, if I do this, users, 0, hobbies, what do you think is going to get printed out? And someone could just raise their hand if they want, or just say, just raise your hand.
The whole list that's in the array, or the whole array.
Exactly, yeah. Cool. Okay, we got trail running, eating, surfing, coding. Sweet, all right. So now we're at this array. What if I just wanted to get coding? What would I need to put right there?
3 for the bracket.
From the 3, boom, coding. Cool. Okay, that's exactly right. So now we can drill into literally any of these values. We can go into George and we can get his movies hobby, okay? So to do that, George is at index 2 of the most outside array, the parent array. We can go into his hobbies, boom. And then movies, I believe, is at index 2. So we can change that 3 into a 2. And boom, we're at movies. That is kind of, that's bracket notation, like in a nutshell. Do any of you have any like questions about that?
How come the hobbies printed like as a list instead of as an array?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's going to be the difference between the various ways that Ruby can print things out to the console. So Ruby has, I don't even know all of them off the top of my head, but there's P and there's puts. Those are the most common ones that I know of. So P is going to be extremely like literal, I guess, like descriptive. It's going to print out exactly what it sees. Puts usually adds a little bit of formatting. So for example, if we do P and I have an array of 1, 2, 3, but then on puts, I have an array of 1, 2, 3. If I run this, for the P, I'm going to see the array. I'm going to see those brackets. But puts, when it sees an array, it adds some formatting and it just automatically will kind of put them in a list. So we do that. There's the two differences. So the reason it did that is because I use the puts and not a P. I like to use puts usually if I'm writing like some kind of user facing thing because it's a little bit more readable, you know, like most human beings that aren't programmers, they'll see that and be like, why, what are those brackets? Like what, I don't know what that is. But they see a list of numbers. They're like, oh, it's a list of numbers. That's normal. Like I know what to do with that. So that's kind of the difference there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
This is being recorded, right? So we can watch it later.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah. So I will, as soon as it's done, it takes like a little bit for it to like render or whatever, but as soon as it's done rendering, I will put it up on the YouTube channel. I'll actually create a separate playlist. Actually, I'll just go and stop the recording. It's almost done. Stop share.